So it's with milk. Nice.
Hello to everybody. It's very nice to be chairing this very interesting international discussion. I'm Dimitri Richter, I'm a cardiologist. We're going to have different specialties and different countries represented on a discussion about what is needed to showcase the benefits from harm reduction. This discussion comes 2 months before the 10th COP of WHO in Panama. From what it seems, there's going to be an insistence only on abstinence and not on harm reduction. We're going to see the scientific part here. We're going to see, as Dr. Farsalinos said before, and I liked it a lot, how politics overcome science. Snooze was the perfect example. I mean, there is no logic about having a ban to sell snooze in where you can sell cigarettes. And let's see if the discussion between science and WHO and governments can bring to something better than at least what it seemed to me after reading the whole WHO approach lately was something like Khrushchev in the 60s being with a shoe and saying, "Niet, niet, niet." And it seems a kind of this approach, niet harm reduction. So let's have first online Dr. Sweanor, which comes from Canada. He's on the Center for Health Law, Politics and Ethics. And we're going to have a video of 8 minutes of him. I would like to ask to everybody who is present to be a little less than 8 minutes than it was originally asked in the presentation or in original statement, so we can have some time for discussion. Please.
Hello, I'm David Sweanor. I'm sorry I can't be in Athens this year, but I'll do my best to try to address this very important issue of essentially how do we implement effective tobacco harm reduction strategies. And if we look at things like how to showcase the benefits of dealing with a harm reduction approach, I think the place to start is to talk about public health history. What is it that's caused life expectancy to more than double in the last 120 or so years? Why do we live so much longer? Why, when I'm just a few days away from my mother turning 100, am I not surprised to find out she has other classmates from a very small high school class that are also turning 100? That's not unusual anymore. How did we get there? Well, if we look at things like Steven Pinker's wonderful book, Enlightenment Now, we've used the principles of the Enlightenment. We use science and reason and humanism. Where we find risk, we seek to reduce it using those principles. That's the reason why we've tremendously limited the sorts of diseases that used to ravage humankind, and we continue to do so. It's the reason why planes and trains and automobiles are massively less hazardous than they used to be. The reason why industrial equipment isn't killing workers at a wholesale level. The reason why we've moved to sanitary food and sanitary water. The reason we now have science-based pharmaceutical products. The way that we have just so tremendously reduced risk. Because where we find risk, we seek to reduce it. That's been the history. And yet, when we look at the issue of tobacco and nicotine, we have known since the work of Michael Russell, if not earlier, and Michael Russell's work was a half a century ago, that people smoke to get nicotine, but they die from the smoke. This should be simple. If people could get their nicotine without sucking smoke into their lungs on an ongoing basis, we wouldn't have this problem. If people got caffeine by smoking tea leaves rather than brewing them, we'd have exactly the same problem. How do we move away from combustion-based delivery? That should be an easy go-to place to save literally millions of lives a year. So look at the history, look at what we've done on so many other issues and replicate it. Because It's there, it's staring us in the face. We have this amazing ability to change public health history. And what happens if we don't do this? Well, the obvious thing is we have continued smoking. And cigarette smoking, along with air pollution, is our leading cause of preventable death. There's about 8 million deaths each. And essentially the same problem. People are sucking the products of combustion into their lungs. Inhaling the products of combustion kills people in huge numbers. We will see that continue if we don't offer reasonable alternatives. Because if we look at that history, what's worked for public health? It's simple. We understand people's lived experience, we meet them where they are, and we empower them to make better decisions about their own health. Those are all aligned if we start dealing sensibly, rationally, humanistically with issues of nicotine. So we can do that, and the failure to do it is this continued carnage, unnecessary death and disease. But also, we see government bodies, UN bodies, losing credibility by destroying their credibility. You know, as Peter Sandman, one of the leading experts on risk communication worldwide, has said, public health people keep asking him, why doesn't the public trust us? And he says the real question they should be asking is, why aren't we trustworthy? Why have we been misleading people? And when we do that, when we lose the trust of the public, it affects us on far broader a range of issues than just tobacco and nicotine. We have people who just don't believe us. We have the sorts of death rates we've seen in many countries from pandemics like we've just experienced, because the public doesn't believe the authorities. And the public doesn't believe the authorities because people who have a position of authority have been misleading them. And in the age of the internet and social media, it isn't hard for people to figure that out. So there's huge costs in the status quo of opposing sensible strategies that could tackle the tobacco epidemic. How do we change this? What can we do? Well, I would argue that the most important thing we can do is pull together more data and be loud about it. You know, years ago, about 40 years ago, I got involved in trying to show that we can use tax policy to reduce cigarette smoking. And it's surprising to a lot of people now. There's a lot of opposition to that in health and medical circles, and people didn't believe it was important. What convinced many were simple graphs showing here's what happens to the price of cigarettes and here's what happens to consumption. Look at these graphs. It's pretty clear cut. And the more examples we could get, the harder it was for anybody to argue this wasn't true. And we got tobacco tax policy. It's probably, almost certainly, the single most effective strategy we've had to reduce cigarette smoking until alternative products came along, which has the ability to make tax look like a weak policy option. So we need that data. Where do we get the data? Sometimes governments already have that data. We need to put it together. Health groups have that data. We need to compile it. We can see the data from places like Sweden and Norway and Iceland and Japan. Like, look at Japan. You know, one of the largest cigarette markets in the world, and half that market for cigarettes disappeared in the last 7 years with the rise of a single viable alternative. So ask the question, what more could we do if we had a range of viable alternatives? If we gave accurate information to consumers about these alternatives on relative risk? What would happen if we used regulatory policy, if we had risk proportionate regulation, so the more hazardous products were more heavily regulated, were more heavily taxed? How quickly could we move people to the lower risk products? Could it be like we saw with Pure Foods, virtually overnight? I think that's possible. You know, people are buying cigarettes every day. Every day we have a chance to intervene, by offering a product that is massively less hazardous, doesn't harm the people around you, is less addictive, and we can make sure that it's available more widely than cigarettes, more at a lower price than cigarettes, with more accurate information about relative risk. We could do amazing things. But that's not all. We can also push the major tobacco companies to truly take a stand. To date, we see an awful lot of them saying, we are going to transform. We're all in on transforming this market to low-risk, non-combustible alternatives. We need to call bullshit on that. To say, if you're serious, there's things you're going to do. And one of them is you're going to share your data, sales data, consumer research data, to show who can move, how rapidly can they move from combustion, deadly cigarettes, to non-combustion products. And that data needs to be available to government authorities. It needs to be available to health researchers, because we need to be able to show what works and indeed what doesn't work in trying to transform a marketplace. We need to push governments. We need to push health agencies. We need to get the data out, go with the science, show what we can accomplish, and follow in the footsteps of so many of these other major public health breakthroughs and make public health history. Thank you, and I wish I was there.
Nice point of view from Mr. Sweanor that puts exactly at the heart of our discussion. And we shall hear also Dr. Bueno from Spain, an oncologic surgeon that will be again on video. And then we can start with a live part. It's a presentation online.
Oh, thank you very much to everybody to invite me here to this conference, this summit. I'm so sorry because, as you can see, I'm between two patients in my operation theater, two cancer patients, and now the anesthesiology is preparing the second patient. And after this conference, I have to come back to my operation theater. I hope you understand that the cancer patients has the priority here today. But I'd like to share with you this presentation is why should be tobacco policies to reduce the number of smokers. Please, next slide. Between November 20th and 25, the 10th Conference of the Parties of World Health Organization's Framework Convention of Tobacco Control will be held in Panama, as you know. The conference will bring together all the signatories of this international treaty, which aims to continuously and substantially reduce the prevalence of tobacco consumption, this is the name, and exposure to smoke, not to vape, to smoke. The Conference of the Parties, held every 2 years, are open to the 182 signatories of the Framework Convention of Tobacco Control, representing 90% of the world's population. The COP's role is to regularly review the implementation of the convention, make necessary decisions to promote its effective enforcement, and adopt protocols, annexes, or amendments to the convention. This year, meeting coincides with the 20th anniversary of the approval of Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, and despite efforts and stricter tobacco control policies and regulations, over 1 billion people worldwide continue to smoke. Therefore, it's essential for the World Health Organization to embrace innovative measures in the fight against tobacco. And the upcoming Conference of the Parties presents an excellent opportunity to this. In this context, Spain will play a significant role as the rotating presidency of the European Union, coordinating the common position of the European Union. Under this position, Spain can contribute to leading the necessary update of global tobacco policies to more effectively reduce the high number of smokers. As an expert in tobacco control, at least as surgical tobacco control. I have prepared the document outlining a series of initiatives that Spain can promote during the presidency of the European Union in preparation to the upcoming COP. First one, tobacco control policies should provide realistic solutions for smokers. Of course, prevention and cessation have been and continue to be a key pillar in the fight against smoking. However, on their own, these actions are not succeeding in reducing the number of smokers, as evidenced by the fact that global smoking rates have not decreased over the past 20 years. Currently, over 1 billion people still smoking. For this reason, it is more necessary than ever to seek realistic solutions for smokers who are unable to quit using traditional tools. The second one is this that you can see in this slide, harm reduction as a complementary tool to prevention and cessation. In 2023, two decades will have passed since the entry into force of the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, which aims to reduce the number of global smokers. However, 20 years after its approval, the goal has not been met, and more than 1 billion people continue smoking. Furthermore, it has been demonstrated that cessation tools have a limited success rate. To different studies, only 35 of smokers managed to quit using traditional with high rates of relapse. Therefore, tobacco control policies must not forget about the smokers and should address this issue. The upcoming COPD is an opportunity to discuss and find this solution in our view. The third one is that science must be as a cornerstone in the fight against tobacco. Yes, of course, this is obviously because the debate of tobacco control must be based on objective scientific arguments and empirical data, moving away from mere opinions and emotional responses. This is the only way to make progress in the fight against tobacco. In this regard, there's a wealth of scientific literature on the potential harm reduction alternatives, such as electronic cigarette, heated tobacco products, nicotine pouches, and snus for smoking cessation. Any other debate on tobacco control that excludes science will only contribute to over 1 billion people continuing smoke worldwide. The next slide, please. We need to use international experience as a basis. As we can see in this slide, a lot of countries around the world, such as the United Kingdom, New Zealand, and Sweden, among others, have already successfully implemented policies that combine stricter regulation of traditional combustion products, which account for the majority of tobacco consumption, with strategies that encourage the use of harm reduction tools for adult smokers with remarkable results. In the case of Sweden, a European Union member, its focus on harm reduction tools has reduced the smoking rate to 5.6%, resulting in a 41% lower incidence of cancer compared to other EU countries, and 38% lower total number of cancer-related deaths. Meanwhile, the United Kingdom has reduced its smoking rates by 5 points in just 5 years, currently standing at 12%. Next slide, please. The priorities in the fight against tobacco should be centered on combustion products. I think now is the World Health Organization is focusing on vaping, but the focus needs to be on combustion products. The focus of the fight against tobacco should remain on traditional cigarettes and other combustible tobacco products, which are the most toxic way to consume nicotine. Nicotine is not the problem, as David Sweanor said in his presentation before. And it is tobacco combustion where the greatest harm to health lies. It is a mistake to prioritize new products when combustible cigarettes kill over 8 million people worldwide each year, and over 1 billion people currently use them. Therefore, the fight against tobacco should primarily focus on combating traditional cigarettes through prevention and cessation, while consulting the research potential of harm reduction tools, such as non-combustible vapor products for smokers who are unable to quit. Next slide, please. This is the last one. This is the contact for media people and our platform in Spain, that we are fighting against this scientific reasons that the World Health Organization is doing against vaping products. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bueno. Good luck to your patient.
I hope so.
Any questions from Dr. Bueno before he goes for surgery? No. Thank you very much. Please.
You're welcome.
One little question. No, thanks, Mr. Bueno. I was just wondering, as I understood, Spain is playing a moderating role. Now he's gone?
Mm-hmm. No, I'm here.
Is playing an organizational and moderating role in the next meeting of the WHO in Panama. What is the, let's say, the feedback from the countries in the EU? Are there, let's say, comments coming from every country, or are some countries present and others not? Can you just reflect a little bit on that?
Oh, this is only a moderate program. I don't know why, because our Ministry of Health, he doesn't want to speak to us with this program, because we are talking, and we have sent our book, we have sent all the scientific papers, but I don't know why Spain is deaf to hear what is now the vaping products and the tobacco harm reduction doing. And we are fighting not against together them, but we need to change. We need that they have to open their eyes and listen to us, because we have the scientific program, and we have the scientific papers, and we saw that in my experience with my patients, we have problem with smokers patients, but we have not respiratory problems or cancer problems with people who is vaping now. And this is a study that I'm doing, and I try to expose next year why this is the reason that the nicotine is not the problem. Nicotine is, in some cases, it could be the solution, but the smoke is the problem.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bueno. We can proceed, and I would like to ask Ms. Glover from New Zealand to continue. If you have slides, or if you just want to comment. Ms. Glover is the Director of Research Excellence concerning smoking. I'm very happy to talk with somebody who made such a big step, being the first one worldwide, like New Zealand, to ban the sale of cigarettes in everybody who was born after 1st January of 2009, if I'm not wrong. And from what I was reading yesterday, UK is considering doing exactly the same thing. So the cousins are following. Please.
It's interesting listening to, what's going to be happening in COP10. I did go to one of the very early meetings that was held, and it was focused on women and what should be in the Framework Convention Tobacco Control for women, and it was held in Japan. At that time, New Zealand was leading tobacco control. We passed the first Smoke-Free Environments Act in the world, a comprehensive Smoke-Free Environments Act. And I remember Derek Yak walking around the room saying, don't see New Zealand as the example of the ceiling. You can go beyond that. And in those times, which must be nearly 30 years ago or 25 years ago, so the countries of the diversity across the world in terms of implementing smoke-free goals and legislation was vastly different, and it still is vastly different. And I think that difference is being lost. We have been at this in New Zealand for over 60 years, educating the public. I think that education is number one, not tax. Tax is a nudging, moving people. And in New Zealand, the tax is so high relative to income that the main group that smoke, the lowest socioeconomic group, can often no longer afford cigarettes, to buy them legally, that is. So we see other problems arising. So another area I've done research in is in childhood obesity, and the research I've done with families about providing food. If they are dependent on smoking and they can't afford to buy, but they have to buy, they'll find the money somewhere, and it comes out of the food budget. It's not a nasty thing they're doing, it's that they're balancing it. And so there are negative consequences of many policies, especially for the lowest socioeconomic people, people with mental health conditions, and in New Zealand and Australia and Canada and the US, the Indigenous peoples are, unfortunately, because of the history of colonisation, they are overrepresented among the lowest socioeconomic groups. We had very, very high rates among women who were pregnant, Māori women, and I've put a lot of focus on that group. And the negative consequences, and policy, good policy, should consider the negative consequences. I have seen over the last 30 years the negative consequences are suppressed. Tobacco control do not want the negative consequences talked about, because then you would need to balance whether or not you implement an even higher tax, forcing people to go to a black market or to take from their food budget. The age generation one, people in New Zealand, even under 18 now, and we have an R18 limit, they're not stopped from getting cigarettes or vaping products. Somebody older buys it for them, or they buy on the black market. I don't want young women, young girls, going to the black market. I don't think that is a safe avenue to push them towards. And so I really think, and I have seen over the last 30 years, compassion, which I'm very glad to be here and to meet many of you and see so many medical doctors centering the patient, concerned about the patient, and still showing a lot of compassion for people who smoke and understanding about dependency. We used to understand about dependency in New Zealand, but people in tobacco control have become very frustrated at the very, very slow rate of decline in smoking, and compassion is gone. People who smoke have been demonized. My participants say they feel like they're treated like lepers. They've been pushed to smoke out the back of the building, down an alleyway next to the rubbish bin. This is in Australia, New Zealand, many other countries now. And the very interesting talk we had previously about well-being and about social interaction, we have deliberately targeted, let's separate them so they can't socially interact. Let's take away everything that smoking gives them. Any pleasure, they're not allowed to interact with other people, so the bans on smoking in public places and restaurants, which of course you want to do something about reducing secondhand smoke, but not allowing, say, a bar to open a special bar where people can smoke, like you have in the Netherlands for people who want to smoke marijuana. So compassion is being lost. Very, very good to see so many doctors here, pragmatic, still with compassion, and focused on the patient and the consumer. That is gone. I would not say don't look to New Zealand. We have a very extreme prohibitionary vision now. Even vaping, it's in the vaping regulation. Get everybody off cigarettes, and then when the number is low enough, then we will get everybody off vaping. And in my presentation, I showed they're already starting to do that when we still have almost 20% of our lowest income group smoking. It's too soon, and I don't support it anyway, as per Konstantinos' presentation. It's not a healthy to live under authoritarian rule. Causes depression, oppression causes depression, anxiety, mental health conditions. I don't support it anyway.
So from what I understand, it's not just, what New Zealand did is not just turning to harm reduction, it's turning to banishment practically. And now I take out smoking and I demonize it. And the next step is the smaller evil. I will destroy it also, but after I have destroyed the first one. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And, we argued for many years in New Zealand to have snus. And then along came, vaping, so we turned to arguing for, please, can we have vaping? And can we have these new oral nicotine products that don't have tobacco in them? And the evidence is there in Sweden and Iceland and Norway that they work. And New Zealand banned them. And then...
Why? Was there any official answer? Or,
because it's going to be easier if there is only one alternative and an easy one to demonize because of the vapor, because people have this... In New Zealand, most people are anti-smoking, really anti-smoking. You walk past somebody on the street, they do the windmill arms. Children, go, ew, there's a person smoking. People hold their nose. They abuse people on the street if they're smoking. It's incredibly punishing. Okay. So the marginalization is quite severe. People are denied accommodation, jobs.
Interesting.
And
sounds a little 1984.
It is a little bit 1984. So with the age ban, it is tobacco control, virtue signaling. It's about control. And the more control, the more you bow down to that, the worse it will get. And just on the Framework Convention of Tobacco Control, the Secretariat already several years ago at their meeting indicated that they want to start to look at going beyond tobacco. This is the first world treaty to deal with a health problem, and the Secretariat has a vision to apply the same framework to reduce the drinking of alcohol and to reduce obesity. So, when
you
I
must be healthy in order to work and not get sick.
Yes.
Any comments, please? No? Okay.
Let me add a comment. I think that it is very similar to the history of marijuana. Marijuana, which was perfectly legal several decades ago suddenly became the big demon that is going to bring people to other heavy drug use like cocaine, heroin, and so on. It was demonized and completely banned for decades, with people few years ago being arrested and being jailed for possessing marijuana. Let's not forget that. And now, suddenly, after more than 6 decades, I think, we are on the verge of completely legalizing all marijuana use, including recreational use. I'm afraid that with nicotine, we are seeing something very similar starting to happen. I hope we won't end up with a ban that will last for 60 years and then realize that nicotine is not really a problem. It may even have some therapeutic effects, in fact, nicotine. But I think it's virtually the same mentality.
You had a comment?
No, I was just going to add that there was news today, an article saying that a load of public health people had been asking for a treaty along the same lines of the FCTC for gambling.
Yes.
So there could be a whole load of them coming up.
Thank you very much. Professor Farsalinos, a comment, please.
Yeah, I think that what we are missing is applying science into policy and regulation and having science guide policy and regulation. I think that the problem that we're seeing with harm reduction is having policy guide the science. I mean, as I mentioned also in my presentation, we have people who decide that this is bad, and then we are looking for evidence to support our predetermined position that this is bad. And that's why we see such level of unprecedented cherry picking or even mispresentation and misinterpretation of evidence in order to support, the already determined positions of regulatory bodies. I mean, I can give an example, the SEER report of the European Commission concerning harm reduction products, nicotine, and so on. It was made by scientists who have never worked in tobacco. It was the epitome of cherry picking. For example, they had a whole section discussing about the cardiovascular and carcinogenic adverse effects of nicotine without mentioning a single of the tens of epidemiological studies from snus and even from NRTs showing that there is zero cardiovascular risk and almost zero cancer risk from using nicotine, not only in a clean form such as an NRT, but also through a tobacco product itself, a non-combustible, of course, tobacco product such as snus. I remember a few years ago, I was invited by the American Heart Association in the US to present on harm reduction, electronic cigarettes at that time. Heated tobacco products didn't really exist. And there was also some representatives of the FDA, and there was another presentation showing how what a huge cardiovascular toxin nicotine is. And they were presenting studies of mice developing atherosclerosis in their aortas when they were exposed to some tremendous, of course, levels of nicotine. So at that time, I was in the panel. I had finished my presentation. They asked them, what about the epidemiological evidence from snus? And we're talking about studies of, for example, for stroke, they analyzed longitudinally 130,000 snus users versus non-smokers in Sweden, and it was done by Karolinska University, not by a scientific team of any tobacco company or other commercial entity. And they found zero risk of having a stroke, whether it's hemorrhagic or ischemic, among snus users compared to non-smokers, non-users of any product. So I asked them, we have the animal data and, of course, cell data, and we have the epidemiological data. Which should we trust? Basically, there was no response. And when I told them, why are we keep insisting on generating animal or toxicology, cell toxicology data, and we are completely ignoring real-world epidemiological data? And they said that, yes, there is some discrepancy, we have to think about it. I mean, there's nothing to think. This is knowledge of 30 years. We know that this has been happening. In Scandinavia, snus use has been a tradition since the 70s. There was a big movement, a switch from smoking to snus use in Sweden in the 80s and early 90s. This is when the movement of going from cigarettes to snus use happened. You know, today Sweden is the only smoke-free country in the world, the only smoke-free country, of course, in Europe, which has set a goal to become smoke-free in 2040. So the Swedes did it 17 years earlier. And when you look at the nicotine use rate in the US, it's similar to the European Union average nicotine use rate, which is about 24%. But the big difference in Sweden is the source of nicotine intake. In Sweden, it's the vast majority coming from snus. In Europe, it's the vast majority coming from tobacco cigarettes. The result is half or even less the death rates from cardiovascular disease, lung cancer, and cancer in other organs in Sweden compared to the rest of the European Union. We already have a real-world example with the best possible long-term epidemiological evidence about reduced risk, which is quantified already for years. And what did the European Union do? They banned snus. It's unbelievable. It's a public health scandal. We should feel embarrassed by that. I mean, it's the same thing that I said yesterday in a meeting in Germany, and there were some German MPs there. I mean, how can we do that? It makes zero sense. There is no other harm reduction product with that level of evidence compared to snus. And the paradox in Europe is even worse because in the US, the FDA has approved a reduced risk claim for snus by the FDA, and in Europe, we have banned the product, and we are selling cigarettes perfectly legally.
So
Zero sense.
Professor Farsalinos, is snus normally sold in the United States?
Yes, yes. And now we have even better products because the companies have developed nicotine pouches which do not contain tobacco but contain nicotine. So they are used in the same way as snus, but they don't have any tobacco. So none of the toxins present in cured tobacco, which is basically an NRT. And still we have countries banning nicotine pouches or creating restrictions for something that is in reality an over-the-counter NRT product and nothing else. It's completely safe. It has no toxins, nothing at all, not even tobacco, and we are banning it. It makes no sense at all.
Any comment, Dr. Cullip, about, please?
Well, I've got some notes. I love what Konstantinos is saying there. I've touched on some of it myself, so I hope I don't... just to explain, I'm a consumer. I use nicotine products, have done for quite a long time. And I came to using nicotine as a former smoker purely by accident. I just wanted to find out about them, tried them, ended up literally, I say, forgetting to smoke. I said to my wife one time, when was the last time I smoked? She said, I think about 4 or 5 weeks ago. So I understand how consumers feel, and I speak to consumers on an almost daily basis from all over the world. And we care about these products. We know that they work for us, and we're trying to do things and influence governments and regulators so that other people who smoke can benefit the way we did. And yet, routinely, we're called trolls, addicts. We're told that our stories are just anecdotes. We're accused of being shills for big tobacco, really insulting stuff. And a lot of this treatment is from the WHO. We can't speak to the WHO. They won't let consumers speak to them, even though we're the most affected in this process. You know, we use nicotine products, and we know how they work. We can't get a word in edgeways. The WHO is not looking for benefits of these products, as Konstantinos has said. It's cherry-picking evidence it needs to go through with its preconceived policy proposals. It ignores increasing body of evidence as the benefits of harm reduction. And we know from the presentations we've seen here in the last couple of days, we've got some great science. We've got an increasing body of science saying that these products are beneficial. And we are on the side of the angels. But the problem is getting that message across. René O'Leary said earlier, you know, consumers are just as fed up as you are at constant claims that we don't know enough about these products. We do know enough. It's not like these products have only come up yesterday. They've been around for 20 years, vaping products. And we may not know everything about them, but it's not to say we don't know anything. We know with our technology these days that if smoking was invented today, by next week we probably know it was lethal. So we know a lot about these products. And the fact that, as Konstantinos says, you're getting products being banned when the most harmful products are still widely available is astonishing. But someone yesterday said, you know, in 20 or 30 years we'll have enough science that we can tell regulators how to regulate properly. But I've got news for you. Regulators are regulating things now, and they're banning them all over the world. So we need to get our messages right. It's not fit to just wait 20 or 30 years until we got that science. We need to be making these messages now, because the other side is making all sorts of weird and wonderful claims, most of them based on no science whatsoever. Just recently there was an article that turned up in the Daily Mail of some doctor in California who said that vapor burns at a higher temperature than cigarette smoke, and so people are barbecuing their lungs. And this got 334,000 views on TikTok, and it reached the Daily Mail and today the Daily Express. And if you click on the Daily Express, if you want just a bit of bonus content on the side, they've got a thing about how Dr. Sarah Kayat will talk you through how vaping causes popcorn lung, which was on a daytime TV program in the UK a few months ago. So
Popcorn lung.
Popcorn lung. So, which is completely untrue. But this is the thing, we need to get our messages right. You know, sometimes consumers are very frustrated when scientists on our side sort of come out with very bland statements, meek statements, like, you know, these are less harmful than smoking, but they're not risk-free. And if you don't smoke, you shouldn't use nicotine products. Well, that just comes out for the other side, and they say, even the people who are in favour of these products say they're very harmful. And that's the imbalance in information that's going out. We need much stronger messages from our side to counter the stuff that's coming from these other people. And I'll just mention on snus, as Konstantinos says, snus is banned in the EU. It's still banned in the UK, even though we've left the EU. And everyone knows this came from a scare back in the 1980s. And then slowly it got banned in the UK and then in Europe. But that product has been used for over 200 years. We have 50 years epidemiological evidence of this, and they still won't lift the ban on snus. We're coming up to a review of the Tobacco Products Directive in the EU, and there's no sign whatsoever that they're going to lift this ban. It was lifted in Switzerland in 2019 because they realised it's pointless. They took the cancer warning off a few years ago, but still no sign that they're going to lift the ban on snus. So if we allow all these products to be banned now, harm reduction products, and the WHO wants that at COP10, its recommendation is that it's banned in all these different countries, leaving combustible cigarettes as the only legal nicotine product in the world. Once those things are banned, like Konstantinos said, you're going to wait 60, 70 years to get those products back, and we have to stop it. So we need robust, strong messages to counter the misinformation and the rubbish that's coming from the other side. And I'm sorry if that turned into a rant.
You know, Martin, it's funny when you think about the paradox of the messaging and the argument of the WHO and several other authorities. They say, we don't know enough about them, so let's ban them. Banning them ensures that we will never learn anything about them, because unless there are people using them, you will never be able to have any kind of epidemiological evidence, and you can't have, you know, studies of millions of users when a product is banned from the market and, you know, asking for some contact research organization to suddenly find thousands or tens of thousands of users and use something that is not available in the market. So it's a perfect recipe for never learning anything, never generating any kind of data, and then they will just perpetuate the same vicious cycle that no data, ban. Ban means, again, no data, which means let's continue the ban. It makes no sense.
You are absolutely right. But I have to say that what really shocked me was what you said about having illegal cigarettes in New Zealand. Because if they arrive there, which is an island, relatively isolated from an ocean, from everything around, imagine in Europe where you have 1,000 roads, we will never be able to stop illegal products. And of course, just raising the price, as you said, it's not the answer. Yes, they should have tax, but just by increasing price, you give people who have not money the idea of going somewhere cheaper and an illegal product.
It's basic economics. There will be a point at which the benefit
Yes.
goes the other way, and it has with New Zealand. I think the other problem with copying another country, Sweden has been reducing smoking and reducing smoking harms for a lot longer than New Zealand. New Zealand has been at this for a lot longer than many other countries, and you see from Professor Sharifa's talk, the problem when another country that has a very different culture and a very different way of meting out punishment if you break the law. So in New Zealand, the young people who do get access to, and under the, whether it's R21, R30, R40, at the moment, there is no fine. We have not imposed a fine on young people if they're caught smoking after this age ban. But in Malaysia, they will be fined. So different countries have a different way of,
Yeah.
implementing.
We went from stigmatizing the product to stigmatizing
The
the
user.
people, the
Yes.
users.
Dr.
Yes.
Storr, I think you have some slides also. Please, can you pass? Dr. Storr from Germany.
So basically, my presentation has already been held by Konstantinos. So a little bit, some background information on Sweden. I'm coming from Germany. We both came from Germany yesterday and tried to persuade members of parliament to not ban flavors in e-cigarettes, which is highly being debated in Germany at the moment. At the same time, we've got a tremendous high prevalence of adult smokers, about 34% of the adult population, which is for a Western industrial country a real catastrophe, because the people, the tobacco controller, do not have any measure, any intervention in place to stop this prevalence, which has been increased by 10% during the pandemic time. So there's no way, at least on the 18th of October, we've got our 6th tobacco harm reduction summit in Frankfurt, which I'm organizing, and then for the first time with the support of the Ministry of Health. So at least there's a little step forward in maybe the comprehension of the necessity of doing something. So basically, some data about Sweden. Konstantinos and Dr. Bueno already talked about it. Sweden has the lowest share of male smokers in the European Union, whereas, as I told you, Germany does have some 36% among male smokers. Sweden is much more less. And this is the most important slide, which shows you that on the left side, the causes of death are indicated, and you see Sweden in comparison with the EU, the first three columns. There you see on each and every smoking attributable death per 100,000, Sweden is doing much more better than the average of the European Union. That means cancers, respiratory tract cancers, COPD, cardiovascular diseases, and lower respiratory tract infections. So in the end, and if you, let's say, calculate it on the EU level, then in the end, some 2,890,000 people and lives can be saved. Death that could have been averted, and that is a tremendously high number. However, Sweden is not being copied by any of the countries. And let's look a little bit into why is Sweden so successful. Is it tobacco control policies or is it harm reduction approaches? So let's go tobacco control policies first. Sweden is not, let's say, in any way avant-garde in the European Union with tobacco control policies, not at all. That means the introduction of advertising bans or health warnings. There are other countries that started much more earlier, like Finland, 1977, Germany, 74. Although we've got a complete advertisement ban in Germany only in the next year, 2024. So we are the last country allowing outside advertisement in public places and spaces. So this is a real mess. But also other countries like Portugal started much earlier than Sweden. And that accounts also for the introduction of any kind of smoking ban. Other countries, as I told you, Finland and Italy were much earlier in that phase. Let's look a little bit into the harm reduction approaches, and that's exactly snus, the black snus, you call it. Konstantinos just mentioned the white snus, the nicotine pouches without any tobacco at all. It is a non-smoking tobacco product used either loose or in pouches, usually placed behind the upper lip. Not very aesthetically, to be honest, and the sale is currently prohibited in all other countries except Sweden. And when we look at Sweden, and this has already been said, the scissor will go out much more since 2023. The rate of smokers is decreasing substantially in the last 20 years, and the rate of snus users is increasing. So a long-standing tradition in Sweden, and it is the increase of use of snus is paralleled by a decrease of the use of combustible cigarettes. And also nicotine. If nicotine is the problem, Michael Russell has already been named. I just took out a quote from him which fascinates me most. It's smokers smoke for the nicotine, but they die from the tar. And that's something which we should keep in mind and see the relative harm of snus is considered very low. And we heard that nicotine for the cardiovascular problem is to be ignored. And it is doubted whether that does have a cancerogenic effect. So this is something we have to keep in mind. First country in the EU to become smoke-free. They have adopted many tobacco control approaches. It has not done so to a greater degree than other European countries. The fact that a non-smoking nicotine delivery system was readily available and widely used seems to be the most likely explanation for Sweden's great success in reducing smoking rates and smoking-related diseases. Where do we go from here? And I think in the light of rapid changes to the nicotine market with the introduction of e-cigarettes and heat-not-burn and nicotine pouches, we need policies that take the relative harms of nicotine into account. And the example of Sweden shows that accepting less risky nicotine administration saves many, many lives. And more research into the relative risks of the product is needed, as well as a switch to a more harm reduction focused approach. What we do now is harm production in that way that we ban all the harm reduction electronic nicotine delivery systems. Many thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much. Is there any question from the audience or any comment from the audience? Please. On the microphone, please.
Hello, my name is Julia Zachioti. I'm from Huffington Post, Greece. It was so interesting what I've heard today, and the thing is that I born and grow up on that decades on the past, that everyone was smoking, and after we realized that that was the wrong way of living. What I've heard today is actually a different message. So which one is the right one? Do we need or can smoke, or we can't smoke? And is it really harm to smoke or not? Because today I was really I'm not sure, living from this room, I'm not really sure which is the right one. It was the right policy many decades ago, or is the right thing what we do now, or what we're trying to persuade people of doing right now? I heard about New Zealand. Do you have any data about reducing the cancers or the diseases by banking the use of cigarettes? Have you realized if we have less cancers?
The ban is for whoever is born after 2009. So that means they are now 14 years old. You couldn't have changed anything.
Okay.
And if
so do we have the wrong message? Is that actually my question?
I think as a clinician, and then please comment if you... First, no, that wasn't the right way of life. Second, no, smoking in all forms is not healthy. Third, we must always accept that human nature, at least a part of us, has a tendency to dependence. And that's a reality. We're not perfect. So either we ban these persons as New Zealand and we put them near the rush and say they don't exist, or we try to satisfy in part their dependency with products that have less chances of killing them. No one can say that all these products are absolutely safe, and nobody will ever say that. And the main idea is that these products, from what we see until now scientifically, have much less harm than normal cigarettes. So it's a question of quantity, and also I think it's a complete change of mentality for medical doctors, in the sense that from the Hippocrates, we have the idea of do not harm. So the question is, will you advise somebody to use something that's harming, but it's doing so much less than the way he's harming himself today?
Well, I think that the answer to this is pretty simple. We are doing it every day with every medical procedure and every medication we prescribe, because there is not a single medication and a single medical procedure without potential side effects and complications. If you look at the complications listed, it doesn't matter if they are rare or not, for coronary angiography, a very common medical procedure that we're doing in many cases in perfectly healthy people as a diagnostic procedure, it lists death as a potential complication. And there are cases, of course, below 1%, 0.1% or something, of death from coronary angiography. But we do it because what Hippocrates' oath is mentioning is not doing harm, but it doesn't mean not doing harm on an absolute level. What we are doing is not creating harm on a relative level compared to what we are trying to treat. So the whole medical science is based on creating interventions, whether it's procedures or products, that where the risk-benefit ratio is far for benefit. But that doesn't mean that these products and these procedures are risk-free. And no medical procedure in reality is risk-free. But I have a question for you.
Sorry, we have one more comment and then we'll
Yes,
we'll
okay,
make
because
the
I have a question for the journalist who asked the question.
I'd just like to say, archaeologists have found that humans have been using nicotine for at least 12,000 years. And so anyone who thinks that we're going to ban nicotine across the world anytime soon is living in fantasy land. The question should be, how can we allow humans to use nicotine in the safest form possible? And at the moment, we have organisations like the WHO trying to ban the safe form while leaving the most harmful form still legal. And I'd just like to put something, a little thought thing in for you. Everyone here, or most people here, have had a nice cup of coffee today. The battle for acceptance socially of coffee went on for 300 years. So society has to decide, are we going to tolerate nicotine use if it's in the safer form, or are we just going to carry on with this fast for a long time? You know?
And Kostas,
yes,
the last comment before... Sorry, Kostas, wait.
Yes,
please.
Just before that. I don't know, I'm referring to you who asked the question. I don't know where your doubts about whether smoking is good or bad is coming from. It's not coming definitely from this discussion, because none of us, and I suppose no one in the conference ever said, that smoking might be good or better than what we were thinking until now. No one suggested that about smoking, unless, I don't know if you refer to smoking you use the term smoking for the use of other products. For the other products, smoking is not the right term because smoke implies combustion and the end result of combustion is smoke. And none of the other products, whether it's snus, e-cigarettes, or heated tobacco products, none of them have combustion. So you may see something that looks like smoke, but this is called technically and scientifically an aerosol, a collection of micro droplets. It's not smoking. And I don't think that anyone suggested here today or even yesterday that smoking is better than we thought. No, it's as bad as we know for years.
We said that aerosol is completely risk-free.
Exactly.
It's the discussion that it's
Exactly.
better than smoking.
Yeah, exactly.
Last question, please.
Thank you. Jeannie Cameron from JCIC International. I wanted to ask Martin in terms of the upcoming COP agenda in November later this year about some of the draconian things that the WHO has on the agenda, such as the redefining of smoke, the banning of open systems, etc. And also to comment on how everybody here, in terms of being from governments that go to that event, that it's not the WHO that would make the decision, it's the government parties, and that they have the right people there. Would you comment on that?
Right, you kind of said it. Yeah, the WHO's got all sorts of weird and wacky plans. We've seen the reports for the COP10 meeting in November, and they are recommending banning open vaping systems, they're recommending banning nicotine pouches, they're recommending banning all flavours in e-cigarettes. They want heated tobacco products to be treated exactly the same as smoking. In fact, they want everything to be treated exactly the same as smoking. And their recommendation is really that you should ban all of these products, like I said, leaving combustible cigarettes as the only legal nicotine product. But like Ginny said, one of the things they have to do this, the FCTC treaty is designed to combat the harms of tobacco smoke. And of course, these products don't produce tobacco smoke. So they're now actually going to try and redefine the word smoke by saying that it's any visible aerosol that comes from a thermally driven reaction. So basically, steam from a kettle will be smoke. I mean, this is how far they're going, because they can't change the words of the treaty, so they have to change the language that we use every day in order to fit in with the treaty. And this is just so far-fetched.
Thank you very much. We are really out of time. If there is a last short comment or question? No? Thank you very much, everybody.